quick recap on some of the topics from this morning before we get into the discussion this afternoon. So we had some discussion on content acquisition, content protection, content distribution, business models. Is the future all OTT? That's all against the backdrop of content owners, content providers and suppliers potentially losing money, having to chase markets. There's supplier consolidation, there's lots of deals going on with networks, with manufacturers, with broadcasters, and there's a blurring of the lines as to what is a broadcaster these days. So this is really where we enter the challenge of the CTO. So we often hear, particularly when we're talking about IT-based projects, that you have to do more with less. You have to be cost-effective, you have to be efficient. Typically what's not defined by the people that you're having those conversations is what's the more and what's the less. The less is typically money and staff. The more is typically bits, bytes, pixels, platforms, customers. Certainly not less equipment, and there's certainly not less complexity in terms of what the guys have got to actually handle. So the CTOs basically have got to balance this. They've got to be able to react to what's happening in the markets, particularly what the latest offerings of the CE manufacturers are and what they're pushing. They basically have to balance off sweating existing assets, transitioning those into newer models. They have to look in a crystal ball and ask, what will my broadcaster look like in the future? They have to balance off the best-of-breed solutions versus one-stop shop situations, and typically are dealing with limited budgets and designing solutions, and as we've heard again this morning, potentially working around a can't pay, won't pay generation. So the panel's got a lot of topics to go through today. I'm just going to basically introduce the topics, let the guys debate amongst themselves, and if they want to have arguments, then that's fine. So we're going to have a quick look at 4K, expectations management, handling the change to OTT and new media, transitioning from traditional broadcast systems to integrated IT ones, the cloud, and software-defined networks. So the first topic is 4K. Most broadcasters have just completed the migration to HD. Is 4K really on the cards? What's driving the requirement for 4K? Is it the end users? Is it the broadcasters? Is it the equipment manufacturers? How do you do 4K on a 4-inch screen? What channel types and what event types lend themselves to the 4K environment? Is this something that is applicable across the board? Is this something that's just specialist event management? And then the platform complexities, IP, satellite, terrestrial. Does this all lend itself, throughout the entire process? So the guys that we've got on the panel today, Dom, Nasser, Robert, Chris, and Stephen, have all got different roles in terms of the way that they operate as CTOs, different channel types. So for the first question, I'm just going to run down the panel in the order that they are. So Dom, views on 4K.
Those lucky broadcasters who quality doesn't actually mean everything. I mean, we like the graphics to look good, we like the show to be crisp, but sometimes when you're telling a story about a battle somewhere in Iraq or whatever, the quality really doesn't matter. So for me, I see 4K more as an acquisition assistant, so that I can have my crews some distance from where the action is, yet still use the extra pixels to be able to zoom into certain areas without putting them in as much danger. So I think from an acquisition perspective, it's useful for us. But I also have the luxury of being able to sit here knowing that it's not really making much difference to my viewers whether they see me in HD or 4K. I think SD and HD, there's a difference. HD and 4K, I don't know, we'll see. But I don't see why we shouldn't be doing it. I don't see why we shouldn't be looking at it. And we read in BroadcastPro over the last 2-3 years that most of the broadcasters out here did a technology refresh over the last 2-3 years. So I'm assuming that their systems are designed and capable, ready to go. They've designed them effectively.
Well, presumably you're using user-generated content and things as part of the broadcast anyway, so some of that isn't really going to scale particularly well, so you have to make do with whatever is out there in terms of the news gathering process.
Correct.
Nasser?
I believe is the whole thing from acquisition to production to playout and distribution. Talking about 4K, it impacts all these areas. In terms of finance, taking from acquisition part, like per se, if we're talking 1 hour of material, this is going to take, in terms of storage, is nearly 1.47 tera. This is per hour. And for people, for us, for production-wise, if we are doing a film, we're shooting a film which is nearly between 50 and 150 hours, that would take 273 terabytes. And if you do 3 copies, we're talking 1 petabyte per film. This is just to start with. Now, this is impact storage, so there's a cost issue. Now, moving into the playout or moving into the editing part, it impacts as well the infrastructure. Now, each stream is like 8 meg. Now, if you have 2 streams to edit, this is 16 gigabyte per second network required for SAM. So this is another impact. Going into transmission satellite. Satellite, now we could use 16 QAM or 32 QAM or 128 or 56, which is basically when we say 64 to 56, this is more of a cable scenario. If we go from let's say 32 QAM to 64, this is terrestrial scenario, which is again, yes, we can save a bit of money there, but that will impact the end user in terms of set-top boxes. So in terms of visibility, as Tom has said, what is the new user experience we are selling? Are we selling more color? Are we selling more resolution? Is this going to bring us more return? Honestly, currently in the Middle East status, I don't think this is happening now. So the cost is very high cost, but yet, yes, we need to be ready for acquisition because we see the roadmap that we'll be moving into 4K, 8K, 16, and then hopefully one day we move into the holographic TV set. So we need to have our acquisition from today set forth.
So looking at the infrastructure, how far ahead do you plan for those increases in levels of infrastructure requirement?
Whatever the plan is, whatever we require or acquire is going to be HD and 4K ready. When we see somebody has to take the lead, and I see the 4K lead will be taken by the cable provider. And collaboration between us, which we use for free to air, between us and cable provider, yes, we could look into it, but not currently.
But presumably with the reducing cost of spinning disks, you know, the actual cost of those extra terabytes and petabytes is coming down, and it's certainly not in the levels that it was when you know broadcasters were using tape.
Today we have nearly 14 zettabytes. This is 2013. We expect by 2020 we're going to have 40 zettabytes. So yes, storage is impact, but storage and analytical application, which required for sale, this is where we should be looking at. I think there was some sort of discussion today in the meeting in terms of how we can monitor the exact rating, and I see everything has to come together into the day.
And how do you plan around how much everything gets compressed down before it gets to the end user? Because you started that process by talking about the acquisition process. What about the eyeballs at the end of it?
Well said enough. We're talking about uncompressed, which is we say an hour is like nearly 1.47 tera. But once we go play it to air, we compress the hell out of it. So we lose lots of quality, which is a shame, but we try to do the best of it. So the time has not yet come for us to stream uncompressed material to end users so they can experience the true quality of the material. But we're getting there.
But then that's maybe part of the discussion that went on this morning in relation to the telcos and actually providing the capacity to the homes in order for people to actually be able to pay for this content, but not necessarily pay for it on the perspectives that they used to in terms of some of the pay mechanisms, but actually bundle it as that service in terms of how much you're actually getting delivered to your door.
I think this is all deals with if we're going to be implementing the near field communication, the NFC. Maybe we need to look into additional revenues of OTT to make it as a complete business case.
Robert, Al Jazeera, what have you been looking at on the 4K side of things?
Well, we've been considering it for sure, but the challenges that we have, and it's been outlined by Dom and Nasser already, is the same. And we've tried to, certainly in my project, forecast 4K in the system, but really what can we do? What's going to develop in 4K? It's still new, the paint's not dry yet, and how that will formulate. I think one of the challenges that we have, even though that my end users would ask for and desire such a format as they see being the way forward, but the minute I start telling them about their transfer rates, you know, we are already arguing over a 50 megabit codec versus a 100 megabit codec, and everyone's saying the 100 megabit codec is too slow.
Yeah.
So winding up that. I think in the core of what we do, 4K is not really going to be something that meets the needs of the business.
So I was reading in your profile that part of your role is to look 10 years hence. So how long ago did you have to start looking at 4K? When did it actually hit the roadmap?
When did it hit the roadmap? February 2012.
Okay. So it's very, very difficult to look that far ahead. So we're having to be reactive as an industry much, much faster to what's actually going on. We had the whole debates about 3D and whether or not everyone needed 6 gig infrastructure and all of the things around the processes of putting all of that infrastructure in place, and then we're immediately hit with 4K, then 8K, and all of the other parts to it. It must be very, very difficult to then manage those end user expectations around the fact that something new's just come up and I want it tomorrow because somebody's just bought the first of the 4K TV sets.
Yeah, you're right, and how to manage that expectation we've tried. At the moment, the direction that we're taking is 4K is roadmapped into our programs area as a acquisition format and a production format, but operating potentially in an island into itself. Again, marrying that into the greater part of our infrastructure puts demands on the rest of the infrastructure that could impede the speed of the rest of the system. And speed is what our end users are constantly on about, is that our new system is all about bringing it in, producing it and getting it out, and they're talking seconds.
Yeah, I think as part of the discussion this morning, it was about content being king, and I think in this domain it is probably speed is king in terms of the ways around it. Chris, you're working in a news network. What's the views on 4K and its applicability in the news environment?
Yes, it's coming. One day, it's coming. The most critical thing for us at the moment is to get the HD services running and working. We've clearly got a standard within the station itself that's running 50 megabits. So 4K is not going to work terribly well on that. But I think the focus for us really is not only on the acquisition side of it, but it's on the platform side of it as well. It is about content is king, and therefore 4K doesn't fit terribly well on an iPhone at the moment. So it has its place, particularly in programming material and some documentary material, and it's something that we will look at. But the focus at the moment has to be on HD, and it has to be on multi-platform delivery.
Do you think there's a difference between event type stuff which might go into the second screen market rather than the first view? So you actually maybe have the higher production content goes into the second view where people can see more detail, but the immediacy is on the initial device.
For some types of events, absolutely, it's entirely possible, which is why one of the things that we try to focus on is an internal production system that allows that multi-platform delivery so that we can produce content directly for the web, directly for tablets, directly for mobiles that may not be the same as for the linear services. So it's important to have a system that is flexible to be able to do it. But as soon as you start going down that road, you end up having the same arguments that we've already had over bandwidth and delivery availabilities.
Okay, cool. Stephen, you supplier representative here. So what's the demand from your customers?
Obviously, yeah, everybody wants it. 4K is already here, and you should buy lots of it. It's kind of just the next step in the immersive experience. I mean, you want to be able to consume content on your phone, on your tablet, HD 4K, it's just the next evolution now. Obviously 8K is coming right on the heels of that. And it's this kind of constant fight between what we can do on the infrastructure that's available today, and when we're talking about compression, should we continue to use compression or should it be uncompressed to the home? I think if the bandwidth increased to the point that you could do uncompressed to the home, nobody would do it. They would still compress it and do more services, or there'd be more tiers of it, or it would be at 8K, 16K, something greater. I would actually challenge the point that content is king, and I'd say it's actually the complete immersive experience that's king. And content is a piece of that, but just content alone is not sufficient to keep people on your service. If it's just content that you're selling, I think that's where we start getting into the space that people want to pirate the content. If the experience you present to them is not the experience they want, then they'll find other ways of getting that content.
Yeah, I think if you look at the sort of the uncompressed situation, and obviously the internal infrastructure, if the internal infrastructure is based around 70-20-26 and you basically got uncompressed going around inside, if you actually took that to its natural logical conclusion, actually you could probably cut those CPU and GPU cycles down significantly if you're not having to do that level of compression. But then that obviously then has those dark fiber demands on the service providers, telcos, ISPs and the like. But I think that it's an interesting concept, but I think you're right that people will say, no, we can't do that. There's spare bandwidth. We have to do more.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
But we were, most of us probably went to IBC this year where someone won an award for live 4K opera streaming over the internet. So I think there's a real opportunity for us incumbents who aren't prepared to do it or invest for whatever reasons, legacy systems or business case. There's an opportunity, it's an OTT sell for a newcomer to come into the market and someone preferably who has the bandwidth and doesn't have those issues to deliver this today. Why not?
Yeah, but I think as part of that is also, how much of that is compressed at the point of consumption versus, where it's actually compressed in the network, and if there is the opportunity for this, ubiquity of not having to worry about compression.
I don't see that as a problem. I mean, to Dr. Nesser was saying about whether we have enough gigabits and gigabytes, and I can't remember the figures because I haven't memorized them. But I mean, if you build the right systems and you analyze those figures, I'd wonder whether they were different sizes in comparison to the disk sizes of the time when we were discussing SD to HD 8 years ago, when we were talking about going to file-based systems 10, 12 years ago. I mean, I don't think we use the same excuses, but I'm not sure that we've already proved we can do it time and time again, and the IT industry seems to move on in greater jumps than we do. So, people are doing it.
Sure. I mean, that actually leads on into the sort of the next topic, which is, how to effectively manage the commercial and strategic expectations of the management through technology. Now, you presented a case just before lunch, which is probably a bit of a nightmare challenge for a number of people, which is, what can you do with 250K? How much of that needs to be an infrastructure build that you do yourselves, how much of that should be outsourced, and how much of it should be hosted externally. So, we've got a lot of challenges in terms of, what, when, and how much. What was the process that you went through in terms of expectation management on your project? Because that wasn't something that you touched on earlier.
No, I didn't get a lot of time to do it justice, unfortunately. But, I mean, essentially, we always had a DR solution, which was in one of our bureaus. It was not ideal for many reasons. That bureau was located in London, for example, which is 7 or 8 hours away, and a visa for some people. So it wasn't, had some obstacles. But we set the budget when we looked at just enhancing that bureau's technology to do all of the things we spoke about, taking those feeds in from all of the different platforms that we have to support these days for live news. Once we'd set the budget, we decided we'd see what we'd do with it. And Dave and I spent a lot of time in my office brainstorming and trying to see what we could come up with. We had to have those ingredients of internet, MPLS, and satellite, but the location we didn't decide until 8 months later after we negotiated something. It could have been in Cairo, it could have been in London, it could have been in numerous places in Washington, each having their own issues. So from the perspective of what we did, we just wanted to build a system that did everything that we would need to do to sustain the brief. We challenged ourselves on the budget anyway, and we used bullying tactics to our suppliers, some of which can verify that was the case. but mostly we used extremely cheap commodity hardware. And I've been speaking at events like this for some time about system design, and if you're going out there and you're designing a new system, we shouldn't be designing for formats. We should be designing your systems based on the things that we know and understand about the future. We know we're going to need space. We know that that space is going to increase. We know we're going to need bandwidth. And we know we're going to need content and data. Metadata is going to be even more important than it has been in the past. And metadata, as we know it, isn't what metadata really is. So we know those things. We can build our systems for that and scale our systems for that, and then just spend very small amounts on the commodity areas around the edge. And we've proved this with Skynet, and we've proved this with some of the bureaus we're building and the new technology that we're introducing into our systems. If you design a system appropriately, you can almost throw away the format-related parts and replace them for a few $1,000s as formats change.
Chris, I overheard you talking during lunch about the challenges of expectation management. How does that square with the kind of things that you deal with on a daily basis?
I think one of the things that's changed in the past few years, certainly in my experience, is an engineering ability of the senior management team. So 10, 15 years ago, there was very little interest in engineering, very little interest in technology. These days, to be honest, most people that you're working alongside in terms of your peers on the board have got quite a lot of technology experience. And you can blame Apple for that, you can blame a whole number of other suppliers. So when your CEO tells you that he's not an engineer and that he won't understand engineering problems, don't believe it, because half the time it's not true. He'll actually have a really good grasp of what is happening and why. So the issue really comes to trying to be able to explain what some of these issues are in a way that they can understand it. And my feeling is that has actually become easier over the past few years rather than being significantly difficult. The bigger issue is the fact that there will always be significantly higher pressure coming from other people in terms of the owners of the corporation or the company you're working for, who will have a totally different view and will be exerting even higher pressure. So I think, in summary, it's become easier, but it's still not a simple task.
And do you think management understand the cost elements and the challenges that you actually have in terms of doing those technology transitions?
I think that's really a personal decision in terms of how and what you explain to your CFO and how you get your finance group involved in whatever you do. A lot of companies here are very lucky because they've got procurement departments, and you can spend a lot of time educating those guys in terms of what the cost of technology is, and then you can work with them and the finance group. So actually the finance group end up with quite high visibility of what you're doing in trying to achieve a good cost-benefit program in terms of the technology build.
Robert, any views on that?
First news, when I read this topic and talking about how you manage your management's expectations, and my first thought was not very well. My executive management expectations that what we're doing will fix every problem that they've ever had, and that everything will run smoothly and faultlessly from this day forward, which is a long way from, I think, the reality of it. Then I have my senior management who have an expectation that this system will do exactly what they deem it to do, which is also not a realistic expectation, although we work to achieve it.
So how do you balance the delivery of today's needs and future needs? So the things that they were screaming about 12 months ago that you're actually delivering now versus the things that they're screaming about now that you don't think you're going to be able to deliver until 12 months' time?
It's a moment-by-moment exercise, I'm afraid. Yes, there is a reality, and unlike some people may understand about the company I work for, I do not have a bottomless pit of money and an endless amount of time. And I end up going back to the same practicality, I think, of any technology deployment, which is that there are parameters which we are bound to stay within inside of, and we do the best with what we can. I think we've applied a lot of forward planning, a lot of forward thinking. Upon the earlier comment there you made about where I say that I'm working 8 to 10 years into the future. That's the way we started this project, is thinking about not solving the problems now, but what are those things that we could foresee.
Sure.
And most of that addresses many of the management's concerns.
Okay. So Stephen, on the supplier side then, what do you need to do in your organisations to ensure that you're providing those, ever decreasing cost solutions to the end users?
It's a challenge and an opportunity, obviously, for us. And while we'd love the market to stay somewhat still and keep buying the same products that we've been selling for the last 20 years and reduce our investment in R&D, it's similar to the challenge that the broadcasters have. In that if you approach this in a kind of a defensive way, then all you will see is cost. If you embrace it, then you will find opportunity. And being the first one into that market, having those differentiating products, having a more sticky experience for the consumer or the user will drive your business up, rather than just trying to keep it still.
Okay.
I think we're underestimating the role of a CTO here. It's not a CTO's job to listen to the CEO and deliver on what the CEO wants. It's a CTO's job to tell the CEO what the vision should be. And I think part of the problem is we spend too long listening to people like these guys on the end telling us where we should be going rather than thinking about it for ourselves. We've invested quite a lot of time and energy into software design and software developers because we can do so much in software with time that we can't ask a supplier to deliver for us. And when I'm putting a business case to the board for investment, I'm selling an experience, a user experience to them and telling them a relatively inexpensive price.
So how do you address the skills gaps, or do you find that there's a skills gap in terms of the people that you need to bring into the organisations? Because that's one of the other things that we always hear in terms of the challenges is the skills gap in terms of people who are sort of hybrid broadcast and IT engineers. If you've got people that you can bring into the organisation that can help you build that vision, how do you bring those people together?
It's interesting because I think that leads into the next topic, right? And I actually had a conversation with Nick Barrett the other day, and I hadn't dawned on me the impact of IP as a delivery system instead of SDI. In my organisation, we may fight, but the IT, broadcast, and network teams are the same.
Right.
The IT team and networks team don't have a different mandate. They don't report to a different boss, and although it takes a long time to educate the network guys into the immediacy and the real-time nature of video, once they get it, they get it. So yes, we have a challenge finding those people. But again, on the software side, if you're building your own software, all of the content, all of the media-related apps and web design out there, that's where the market is. So we don't have a problem finding developers. We have a problem finding broadcast engineers who understand networks. We have a problem finding network engineers who understand broadcast. But as I keep saying to my guys, forget them. They're in the past. The future is the software development.
Okay, cool. As I said, that does lead into one of the other topics, which is the sort of traditional broadcast systems into IT and the transition between the relevant parts to it. Some people see this as a fairly Herculean task, and other people see it as a fairly simple, natural evolution to things. What are the views in terms of how complex and how difficult has that been, and how do we think it will be? So, NASA, any views on that one?
Well, definitely things are moving into IP more than traditional. And now with the cloud, we see more and more. There are more like private clouds and there's public clouds. And we see the marriage between the private and the public cloud, which we call it, which more or less merge the both worlds and reduces the cost. Now, this could be if we do it like locally within the infrastructure, which is all IP-based. I myself is a bit nowadays reluctant in going into all IP-based due to redundancy required, as we come from a background of looking into resilience and duality and N+1. So we try to get the best both worlds together. Transmission is one thing, production is another. Yet IP We see, yes, we're moving into the IP domain more and more, and possibly we'll be moving into the cloud, and with a bit, as I mentioned, between private and public domain.
You've got two parts to that. You've got the IP part of the equation, and then you've got the sort of the traditional networks and the sort of the SDI, the baseband domain, versus the things that we're now faced with the new technologies. 4K doesn't really lend itself to that baseband domain. So we've got to embrace some of these IT things, and there's part of the discussion and in terms of the cloud and how we deal with the aspects of trust and whether or not it's a trusted network. You talk there about the public and the private. Actually, if we get the right network engineers, if we have the right software engineers, we shouldn't have a trust issue. It should be something which everyone is capable of actually rolling out and knowing that they've got relevant levels of protection. Part of the panel discussion this morning was there's almost an expectation that content is going to get ripped off. Well, there's probably not a network anywhere in the world that can't be breached if somebody tries their best to do it. Whether that's your internal network or whether that's something that's hosted somewhere shouldn't really make a great deal of difference. So in reality, we may end up with a situation where there is no such definition between a private cloud and the public cloud. It will just be storage and infrastructure services as opposed to individual elements which are in control of a particular domain. Is that something that you're building into the sort of the infrastructure that you're putting in place, or are you trying to keep certain parts in-house?
It's all about OPEX versus CAPEX. Now we know outsourcing is more of an OPEX scenario, so we save on the assets. But if we're going to go, just thinking loudly, into the outsourcing of a cloud, public cloud, then we're going to pay as we go, cheaper. So we could use it for certain applications, not all. If we use the private cloud, which is internal, or we could host it somewhere else, then we're in control of the management, we're in control of the security as well. Now having the fog in between, which is part of we cache in the public cloud internally, this is for speed and resilience. I think that would be the perfect marriage, but this is the future.
But then
yes, we are looking at
that. Again, all comes down to that network bandwidth discussion and potentially where the money is in the future for the telcos.
It's not only the bandwidth, it's the availability of the bandwidth in the Middle East market. We don't have yet, I'm not talking about UAE, but mostly regionally wise, the stability of the IP-based telecom market. So this is a major challenge. So we're looking forward, because this is one way where we can save costs, and this is where our CEOs demands. And for us, even going back to the scenario of whether we see the 4K coming for the CEOs, it has to be penny for penny. And for the current proposition, as we spoke about in terms of user experience, it is not black and white to color. So I can't expect, not optimistic about it currently, that we can pass the bill to the CEO to approve it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Robert, what's the situation in terms of things that you're working on? Do you see a traditional broadcast system anymore, or is everything really an integrated IT solution now?
There are like budget channels, and there are prime channels network. Budget channels, they go traditional still. Networks, in enterprise, we're more and more going into the high-end, IP-based. So moving forward from that, I kind of believe that there has to be, down the line, some sort of even some sort of cost cuttings into the current infrastructure and streamlining the operation further in terms of whatever being used currently. This is across the globe. But the key is how we can reduce the cost and maximize the profit. of getting more distribution channels, more deliverables.
And
Robert,
your views on traditional broadcast versus whether or not we're already in that integrated IT environment?
Well, we're certainly in a hybrid environment, and I embrace the IT move. I'm looking forward to that. That's what I want to see. It allows us to just build one set of infrastructure instead of, and ideally get rid of these 1,000 squared routers that we're getting all over the place even now, and taking them back to just IT commodity equipment again, which is going to reduce our cost and as I'm seeing already, increase our flexibility. Our plans are just, at the moment now, we're just running out as much fibre as we can afford across the campus,
right.
Allowing us to quickly grow into what will be a more IT-based system, and that's what I want to see. That's what the core of what we're doing at the moment is taking the video in here and popping it out at the other end, and as much as is practical, not handling serial video anymore because it's inefficient in comparison.
How does that stack up in your news world, Chris, in terms of the balance between specific broadcast-based equipment?
It's I think as far as we're concerned, it's business as usual. Okay, we're not 100% there yet. I think as Robert says, we are living in this hybrid world of broadcast technology and IT. It will always be a bit of broadcast telly at the front end in terms of the camera, the physical acquisition through the lens. Whether it will stay that way all the way through to the very end until I've got an RJ45 in the back of my head, perhaps. It's, but we have IT technology throughout the entire installation. And the more that we can use more commodity-based material, more commodity-based equipment, disk servers and everything else, actually the better, because as Robert said, that brings the cost down so long as you've got the reliability up. It is business as usual. It's not a Herculean task to be merging old traditional IT departments and groups or broadcast engineering departments and groups. We've been doing this for 20 years. So during that time, there has been some education, and the people that are popping out of college now are significantly better qualified in terms of designing networks and understanding a bit more about broadcast technology and broadcast systems flow than they've ever been before. So it's an awful lot easier now, but we are still living in a hybrid world.
So,
I'd like to speak.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not allowed, is it?
No, you have to say something interesting now.
Okay, something interesting. There's a challenge. I mean, it's no secret, and I'm looking around, I see a lot of engineers in this room. We've been using IT systems for the last 10 years, right? They're badged, and they're provided by manufacturers, such as represented on this channel, with extremely badly written software based on OSs that crash, which has led to us not trusting it. But the fact is, we've been living with these IP realities for a long, long, long time. And without harping on about it, one of the real problems we had when we built Skynet was the frustration of having to bring everything back to baseband video. You keep referring to Chris as the news expert, but I work for a news channel as well. And I said 50% of that content was coming via non-satellite. Even the satellite stuff, by the time it hits us, it's a stream. It's an ASI stream. It's an IP output. I have no reason to go to video apart from monitoring. And it frustrates me tremendously the amount of money I have to spend, and I apologise to our colleagues who deal with SDI and systems like that. But it frustrates me the amount of money we have to spend to go back to baseband. I relish the idea about keeping it in the cloud or keeping it in the IP infrastructure, IP world. And I don't mean IP baseband, I mean IP, the low-res streams. You'll agree most of this stuff is 2, 4, 6 megabits.
6 meg.
So yeah, we've been living with it, and we want to see more of it. And and Dave can be testament to this, we couldn't find the products to help us keep it in that stream domain.
Right. So then, leading that on to the discussion around the cloud and the infrastructure, imagine I've been through a process over the course of the last 6-8 months or so of launching a variety of different services. It seems there's a little bit of a sort of a blending of the service provider becoming the broadcaster. how do you square the relationship between providing the kind of services that these guys need and actually almost trying to replace them by having that infrastructure that is badged as your own?
Yeah, so the last 18 months I've been traveling the world, meeting with all of our customers and basically having the conversation that we were just having now about what is the impact of that transition, when is it going to happen, what does it mean? And there's two very strong camps of mind thought around it, and there's not really anybody in between. And one camp is, this is that dream that you had as a kid where you're standing in front of the class with no clothes on that just kind of became real. And the other camp is, this is absolute utopia. Why have we not had this for the last 5 to 7 years? The reality of it is going to be a gentle transition. It's not going to be an overnight switch. There's too much money that's been invested in baseband infrastructure and product that you've got to get your money out of. But anything new moving forward should be done in a pure software play and not go back to baseband. There's no business value in pulling out your 10,000 squared baseband router and replacing it with a whole load of little IP to baseband widgets, and you're not going to see the money or the return on the money from doing that. But you will see the return on the money by beginning today transitioning away from traditional platforms and into software-centric platforms, into a model that you no longer have this relationship of one function to one appliance. Like your graphics and branding device is only a graphics and branding device. Your encoder is only an encoder. Your dialogue normalization process only does dialogue normalization. As we can move into this IT domain and do everything in software, you have common resource, common infrastructure between all tasks, and you can then load share those functions across those resources. I can't remember, what's the original question?
The original,
I like the answer.
The original question was based around the thought about whether or not you're sort of creeping into the broadcast domain around the provision of those services.
Yeah, so the general trend that we're seeing there is, on day one, everybody wants to stand this stuff up in their premise, in their data center, have complete control over it, not put it in a public cloud, not put it in a private cloud. It's just data center origination, just using IP and software to make it work. But they want that so that A, they get the experience in that, and they can begin to trust the platform, and B, they just don't trust anybody else to do it for them. It's still this thought process or mindset that I must control this domain. But it is done with the intent to then move these services off, and that once you're in a platform that can be hosted by somebody else and can be managed by somebody else, why am I paying my own staff to manage it? And then the next logical step in that is, why am I paying my own staff to actually run it? Now, so not only the kind of the day-to-day management of the infrastructure, but also the actual operations piece of it as well. So we're beginning to see more of a swing back towards actually using service providers to be the core infrastructure and the operation, and the content licenses really just telling the story, providing the content and collecting the money.
So kind of to round all of this up then, part of the discussion from this morning is that there's a lot of discussion around content ownership, content creation. We're now looking at that sort of end user perspective in terms of, there are going to be the content creators, there are going to be the end users. Is there a view as to when we think that the broadcasters will be ready to just be the content generators and owners and to do that kind of outsourcing? Don, what would your view be on at what point would you be comfortable to say, I've got the guys that are outside that are providing those levels of service rather than having to hire them in order to do what I want?
I mean, we're a relatively young company, and I think if they could have saved on the investment of the engineering teams and the infrastructure when they built that system, I'm fairly sure that they would have done. If you talk to the CTOs, and the CTOs represented here and the CTOs in the audience, they're going to tell you absolutely we can't trust these people to manage our systems for us. It would be a disaster, guys. What are you thinking? But if you speak to the CEOs, and we can ask them later, I'm sure if I went to speak to Mr. Buterak, who's the only one I can see, and pitched him an OPEX-only saving year on year, he'd bite my hand off. And I don't think we're too far away from that. I'm going to ruin that statement for Mr. Buterak now by saying I think there's two parties in the future, the people that create content and the people that consume content. And I can't see the people in the middle anymore. The people who create the content will sell that to the end user. At the moment, it's convenient to sell it through third parties and aggregators because they don't have direct relationships with that end user. but those content creators are more and more having those end relationships now. And there's some very big parties in the world who know each of us extremely well, more than we may like, have personal relationships with us, know what we like to do, what we like to buy, and who we like to spend our time with, and also have a commercial relationship with us, and more money than the combined wealth of everybody in this room. So when it comes to where the content is going to come from and who's going to distribute it, I can't see a future for the model as we see it today. The separation there is for live events. So you have to say this, obviously. News is, is a live event. Thank you, Chris. And the value is in the live. Sport is the value is in the live. The value is not so much in the replay. So there's people who have content who can distribute that to end users directly, and then the live events, which are going to be specifically money-making events for whoever owns the rights or whoever owns the content.
Thank you very much, panelists.